What would you think if I told you that a man's deepest obsessions are rarely about the woman herself, but about the parts of his own unconscious that she accidentally awakens? Some women carry a mystery that burns under the surface. They do not explain their silence. They do not soften their boundaries for the comfort of the masculine ego. They remain still, poised, detached, not because they are cold, but because they refuse to be consumed by dynamics that drain their life force. And this silence, this distance, ignites something primal in a man's mind. Carl Jung warned that men do not fall in love with women as they are. They fall in love with the symbols they project onto them, especially the emotionally unavailable woman. She becomes the canvas for his forbidden desires, the unspoken cravings he has not dared to face within himself. She is no longer just a person. She becomes an archetype woven from threads of shadow and longing. This is not romance. It is alchemy, and it is dangerous. For the man, it starts as fascination, but fascination quickly morphs into obsession when the woman remains emotionally elusive. He tells himself he wants her, but what he truly wants is the version of himself he imagines in her presence. Her silence reflects back to him the very emptiness he has spent a lifetime avoiding. The first forbidden desire he projects onto her is the desire for conquest, not of her body, but of his own limitations. She becomes the proof he needs that he is powerful, worthy, chosen. In Jungian terms, she is the anima, the unconscious feminine within his own psyche. But instead of integrating this energy, he externalizes it. He turns her into the prize he must possess to silence his internal inadequacy. And so, the chase begins. But the emotionally detached woman does not participate. She does not reassure. She does not lean forward to rescue him from his spiral. She remains sovereign. She does not collapse into the role of therapist, mother, or emotional caretaker. This triggers his shadow, the part of his psyche that cannot tolerate rejection, that equates silence with humiliation. Yet what he calls rejection is often protection. The woman who holds back knows this. She understands that giving herself too soon to a man who seeks conquest is spiritual self-abandonment. She refuses to be consumed by his ego's hunger. The second forbidden desire is the craving for emotional submission. This is deeper than sex. It is the psychological need for a woman to validate his existence by softening her walls, by making him the center of her universe. But the emotionally detached woman knows the cost of this too well. She has likely played that role before, surrendering her time, her energy, her emotional labor to men who mistook her nurturing for weakness. Now she has evolved. Her distance is not cruelty. It is discipline. She understands the masculine shadow's need to conquer the feminine soul. But she also knows that true love does not begin with possession. It begins with respect. And so, she withholds herself, forcing him to face the mirror he would rather avoid. That mirror is where the third forbidden desire lives, the desire for transcendence through another person. Most men are never taught how to access spiritual transformation within themselves. Instead, they seek it in a woman's attention. They believe that if she finally chooses them, if she finally opens her heart, they will be redeemed from the mediocrity of their daily life. They project onto her the fantasy of salvation. But no woman can save a man from his own disconnection. The emotionally detached woman knows this. That's why she stays in her power, even when he obsesses, even when he spirals. She knows that his fixation is not love. It is ego inflation dressed as desire. She refuses to become the drug that numbs his existential ache, and so she remains still. This stillness drives him deeper into his shadow. He cannot control it. He cannot predict it. He cannot resolve it with charm or status. He must face himself. He must ask, what am I really chasing? Why does her silence hurt me more than her rejection? Why do I need her validation to feel whole? Most men never ask these questions, but the few who do begin the path of true individuation. They stop projecting their anima onto emotionally detached women. They stop mistaking obsession for love. They stop confusing possession with intimacy. They begin to integrate their own feminine energy, the mystery, the depth, the inner silence. They become whole, not because she returned to them, but because they return to themselves. For the woman, this is the ultimate power, not in controlling him, but in liberating herself from the role of ego supply. She does not chase. She does not explain. She does not dilute her energy for a man who has not yet learned how to hold himself. Her silence is her sovereignty. The emotionally detached woman becomes, in the mind of the obsessive man, both a wound and a doorway. Her absence creates a psychological vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. His mind will try to fill it with fantasies, projections, stories about who she is and why she resists him. But the truth is simpler and far more threatening. She resists because she does not need to be chosen by him. She resists because she has already chosen herself. Carl Jung described this dynamic as the projection of the anima, the unconscious feminine, onto real women. When a man encounters a woman who lives in her own emotional sovereignty, she embodies qualities he has long buried in himself: mystery, intuition, chaos, sensual detachment, deep knowing. She becomes a living mirror of what he has rejected in his own soul. And instead of integrating those qualities, he obsesses over her. This is why he can't stop thinking about her. Not because she is necessarily the perfect woman for him, but because she stirs something ancient in his unconscious. She represents the hidden aspects of himself he has refused to meet. His longing is not for her body, or even for her attention. It is for the parts of himself she awakens by refusing to collapse into his expectations. The masculine ego, conditioned by society to believe it must conquer and control, is destabilized by the woman who cannot be owned. She does not fit into his narrative. She refuses to play the role of the emotionally available prize he can win with effort or charm. She stands outside of that game. Her silence is not passive. It is powerful. It is a refusal to participate in the transactional dynamics of love that have become so common, yet so empty. And this creates cognitive dissonance in his mind. He may tell himself she's cold, or damaged, or manipulative. But beneath the rationalizations, there is a deeper knowing. She is triggering his shadow. She is confronting him with his own spiritual poverty, the parts of him that have settled for shallow connections, for surface-level validation, for egoic games that mean nothing when faced with true depth. In that silence, he is forced to ask himself questions he has spent a lifetime avoiding. Why do I only desire what resists me? What parts of myself do I project onto women I can't have? Is my obsession about love, or is it about control? These are dangerous questions because they threaten the false self, the persona that believes love is about acquisition, attention, and emotional submission. Jung warned that the shadow resists being seen. It will twist and turn, create narratives, find distractions, anything to avoid direct confrontation. But the woman who stays in her power becomes a catalyst for this confrontation. She does not even need to speak. Her refusal to chase becomes the alchemical fire that burns away his delusions. And for the woman, this is not about manipulation. It is about self-preservation. She knows that giving herself to a man who seeks her only as a projection of his own unmet needs will lead to her own spiritual exhaustion. She has done that before, overgiven, over-explained, over-nurtured, only to be abandoned once his ego was soothed. Now, she chooses stillness. Her distance is not cruelty, it is clarity. She is not interested in being the emotional caretaker for a man's inner child. She is not here to soothe his wounds at the cost of her own energy. She will not play the role of the sacrificial feminine, a role too many women have been conditioned to accept. Instead, she stands as an archetype of the untamed feminine, the part of the psyche that cannot be bought, coaxed, or controlled. And this drives him deeper into himself. He may resist this at first, he may spiral into resentment or attempt to provoke a reaction. He may send mixed signals, lash out, or withdraw to punish her. But beneath these surface-level reactions is the truth. He has been forced to meet his shadow because of her refusal to give him what he thinks he wants. What he really wants is not her attention. It is transformation. But he doesn't know that yet. The emotionally detached woman becomes a rite of passage. She is not the mother who soothes, nor the seductress who pleases. She is the mirror that reflects the parts of him that are incomplete. And if he has the courage to stay in the discomfort long enough, he may emerge on the other side, no longer obsessed with her, but in touch with himself. For the woman, this is liberation. She no longer sees a man's obsession as proof of her worth, nor his silence as punishment. She understands the alchemy at play. She knows that his thoughts circling her name are not chains. They are keys. Whether he uses them is his choice. When a man finds himself haunted by thoughts of the woman who won't yield, he is not chasing her. He is chasing his own anima. In Jungian psychology, the anima is not just the feminine figure in dreams or fantasies. It is the gateway to his emotional depth, the bridge to his unconscious soul. But if he has never done the inner work to meet her within himself, he will project her onto real women, especially the ones he cannot control. The emotionally detached woman becomes the vessel for these projections. She is the untouched chalice, the sacred enigma, the forbidden fruit. But more than anything, she is the wound that will not close. She forces him to confront his own inner emptiness because her silence leaves him alone with the voices he has spent his life drowning out. This is why obsession feels so violent. It is not about love. It is about avoidance. He wants her to relieve him of his own inner chaos. He wants her to pick up the pieces of his fractured ego. He wants her to say, "You are enough now because I have chosen you." But she doesn't say it. She says nothing. And her silence echoes louder than any rejection. Carl Jung warned of this dangerous split between the conscious masculine and the unconscious feminine. A man who has not integrated his anima will forever chase women who mirror back to him his own lack of emotional wholeness. He will pursue, conquer, seduce, and then, when the woman surrenders, he will lose interest. Because it was never about her. It was about the feeling she gave him, the thrill of escaping his own inadequacy, even for a moment. But the woman who stays detached breaks this cycle. She does not surrender to his pattern. She does not soothe his ego or collapse into the familiar dance of emotional codependence. Her refusal is not an act of cruelty. It is an invitation to growth. She invites him to stop chasing her and start meeting himself. And for many men, this is terrifying, because it requires a death of the old self. The version of him that defines worthiness by conquest must dissolve. The version of him that believes love is about possession must fall away. He must face his own emotional wounds, his mother complex, his unresolved childhood fears of abandonment and rejection. Most will not do this work. They will find another woman to project onto, another distraction, another chase. But the emotionally detached woman remains unforgettable, precisely because she is not easily replaced. She touches the soul in a way that no surface-level relationship can mimic. She becomes the one who got away, not because she was elusive, but because she was real. She represents the part of himself he has yet to reclaim. And for the woman, this is not about superiority or manipulation. It is about knowing the difference between love and projection. She has learned the cost of being the emotional caretaker for men who refuse to meet their own shadows. She knows what happens when she overextends. She becomes depleted, resentful, disconnected from her own center. Now she chooses a different path. She lets the man spiral if he must. She lets him obsess, replay conversations, analyze her silences, question his own worth. She does not intervene. She does not explain herself. She does not rescue him from his initiation into the unconscious, because she knows that if he is to truly love her, or any woman, he must first love the feminine within himself. He must learn to hold his own emotional depth without outsourcing it to someone else. This is not cruelty, it is wisdom. In ancient alchemy, transformation begins with dissolution, the breaking down of old structures to create space for something new. The emotionally detached woman is often the catalyst for this dissolution in a man's psyche. She dismantles his illusions. She burns away his egoic fantasies. She forces him to sit in the ashes of his own unworthiness until he learns to rise, not as the conqueror of women, but as the integrator of his own soul. This is the secret Jung tried to reveal, that the feminine is not here to be possessed, but to be honored, and that the masculine must face his shadow, not to destroy it, but to reconcile with it. For the woman, there is profound freedom in understanding this. She no longer wastes her life trying to explain her silence or justify her distance. She no longer trades her sovereignty for temporary validation. She becomes the woman who chooses herself first, knowing that any man worthy of her heart must first be worthy of his own. She is not the mirror for his ego. She is the mirror for his soul. And some men will shatter when they look into it. But the few who dare to stay and see clearly, they are the ones who awaken. For the man who cannot stop thinking about her, the obsession is not about her body, her voice, or even her presence. It is about the labyrinth she silently weaves around his unconscious. She is the unanswered question he cannot solve, the door that will not open, the echo of something lost long before he met her, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in past relationships, or perhaps in lifetimes of avoiding his own emotional truth. This is where Jung's theory of projection becomes more than just an intellectual idea. It becomes an emotional crisis. The man projects onto her his longing for wholeness. He turns her into a symbol of completion, of peace, of existential relief. She is the goddess, the savior, the balm for his restless mind. But she is also the dark feminine, unpredictable, untamable, and unwilling to be reduced to a role in his internal play. And so his mind loops. He tells himself stories about her. He imagines scenarios where she finally softens, finally submits, finally gives him the resolution he craves. But the emotionally detached woman does not play by these rules. She knows that surrender, in the wrong hands, is spiritual suicide. She has lived the consequences of becoming too available to men who only wanted to escape themselves through her. So she chooses silence. This silence is not passive. It is an act of power. It is a declaration that she will not be an accessory to a man's ego development. If he wants her, he must first want the parts of himself he has been running from. He must sit with his insecurities, his fears of rejection, his terror of insignificance. He must meet his own shadow before he earns the right to meet her heart. And this is where the alchemy begins. Desire without consciousness becomes addiction, but desire with awareness becomes transformation. Jung knew this. He spoke often of the tension between opposites, the push and pull of attraction, the agony of desire mixed with fear. He called this process enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposites. The man who obsesses over the emotionally detached woman eventually faces this reversal. What began as pursuit becomes surrender. What began as conquest becomes introspection. The woman's silence forces him into this reversal. He cannot force her into his world, so he must enter his own. He begins to notice the patterns, how he chases unavailable women, how he mistakes rejection for seduction, how he confuses ego validation with intimacy, and if he is courageous, he begins the painful work of shadow integration. He asks himself, what parts of me have I disowned? Why do I need her attention to feel alive? What am I avoiding in myself that her distance makes impossible to ignore? These are not comfortable questions. They dismantle the persona, the mask he wears to appear successful, desirable, in control. They expose his vulnerabilities, his need for reassurance, his unresolved mother wounds. And in this exposure, something sacred happens. He begins to individuate. Individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. It is about integrating the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, the ego and the soul. It is about realizing that no woman, not even the most magnetic, mysterious, or detached, can complete him. She can only reflect back what is already inside. For the emotionally detached woman, this process is not about dominance or emotional manipulation. It is about truth. She refuses to play the role of savior because she understands that true love cannot exist where projection lives. She has no interest in being worshipped or pursued by men who see her as a cure for their inner void. She wants a man who has met himself, a man who has sat with his shadow long enough to stop running from it. A man who has learned to hold his own emotions without outsourcing them to a woman's attention. A man who can love from wholeness, not from hunger. And so she waits, not for him, but for herself. She waits for the moment when she no longer feels responsible for other people's healing. She waits for the day when she can love without losing herself. She waits for the rare man who understands that obsession is not intimacy and that possession is not love. Until then, she remains untouchable, not because she is cold, but because she is awake. She knows the difference between being desired and being valued, and she would rather be alone in her sovereignty than entangled in someone else's shadow. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.